I pulled into my mother's driveway just as the last traces of daylight faded, the autumn sky giving way to the cool dark of an Iowa evening. My daughter, Zinnia, sat quietly in the back seat, clutching the worn stuffed rabbit she carried everywhere. She didn't speak as I turned off the ignition, and I didn't push her. I knew the unease in her chest mirrored my own. Family dinners at my mother Valora's house had always been a performance. Warm smiles laid over hidden fractures, polished silverware masking sharp edges. The porch light glowed against the old siding, casting long shadows on the walkway. As soon as I opened the door, voices spilled out. Laughter, conversation, the sound of a gathering meant to feel safe. But I knew better. I reached for Zinnia's hand and gave it a gentle squeeze. She hesitated, eyes flicking up at me. "Do we have to go in?" she whispered. "Yes," I said softly. "But remember, we'll sit together." Inside, the scent of roasted chicken and spiced apples filled the house. My sister Isolda was the first to greet us. She flashed a smile that was too wide, her left hand raised to ensure the diamond on her finger caught the light. She angled it toward me deliberately, as if her engagement itself were a trophy I was meant to envy. "Finally, you made it," she said, brushing past me to take Zinnia's shoulders. "Look at you, sweetheart, growing taller every time I see you." Zinnia offered a shy smile, then pulled back slightly. I caught the subtle recoil and stepped closer. From across the room, Valora's voice rang out. "Darren, come in, sit down. We're all waiting." Her tone was warm for the others, but cooler for me, like I was the guest who arrived late to a show. Around the table, relatives offered greetings, but their glances flickered with judgment I knew too well. I wasn't the sister with the glittering fiancé. I was the youngest, the one who had walked away from the family mold, the one who returned only for nights like this. I guided Zinnia toward the table, where place cards had been set, though I noticed one beside Harlan, the fiancé, suspiciously empty. My daughter slowed, her hand tightening around mine. "Can I sit by you?" she asked softly. "Of course," I murmured, pulling out the chair beside mine. The room felt staged, like every laugh had been rehearsed, every compliment scripted. I slipped into my seat, trying not to betray how little I trusted the atmosphere. Somewhere deep down, I reminded myself, I was the youngest, and in this house, the one ignored. Dinner began with polite conversation, Isolda speaking at length about wedding venues, Harlan chiming in with opinions delivered as if they were gospel. The clinking of silverware filled the pauses. Zinnia picked at her food, shoulders tense. Halfway through the meal, Harlan leaned back, his voice booming above the chatter. "The kids today don't know respect. Back in my day, you didn't talk back. You learned discipline the right way." Valora nodded immediately, eyes shining with approval. "That's exactly right. Discipline makes strong children." I glanced at Zinnia, who ducked her head further. My chest tightened. I set my fork down deliberately and spoke evenly. Respect isn't taught by force. It's earned. The table grew quiet for a beat before Isolda rushed in, laughter brittle. "He's only saying what everyone's thinking, Darren. He wants kids to grow up right." A cousin muttered, "You're too soft." Zinnia shifted, pushing food around her plate, her discomfort written in every small gesture. I leaned back, choosing my words carefully. Sometimes silence isn't wisdom. It's just cowardice. No one answered. Instead, Valora steered the conversation back to wedding plans. But the tension lingered like smoke that wouldn't clear. I remembered the first time Harlan had stepped into our family. He'd shaken my hand firmly, looked me in the eye, and promised, "I'll treat Zinnia like my own daughter." I had wanted to believe him, wanted to ease the knot of worry that always grew when strangers entered my daughter's world. But promises, I had learned, were easy currency, spent freely, honored rarely. I looked at him now, his expression hard, eyes glinting with something that made the promise hollow. "You once said you'd look after her with kindness," I said quietly. He smirked, setting his fork down with a deliberate clink. "I never said I'd let a child run wild." Before I could reply, Isolda cut in sharply, her voice edged with steel. "He's the best thing that ever happened to me. You should be happy for me instead of finding fault in everything he says." Her words landed heavy, sharp as broken glass. The familiar sting of being the outsider in my own bloodline washed over me. No matter what I did, I was the one who didn't belong. Zinnia pushed her chair back suddenly, dragging it closer to mine with a soft scrape across the floor. She refused to sit beside Harlan, her little body angled toward me like a shield. Valora frowned. "She's spoiled. You let her get away with too much." Others murmured in agreement. I looked at the chair left empty beside Harlan. It loomed larger than the others, a silent witness to the unease none of them would admit. In my head, the words formed without mercy. That chair wasn't just empty, it screamed louder than any words could. Valora attempted to smooth things over with a half-hearted joke, something about children clinging to their mothers, but the air had shifted. The weight of what wasn't said pressed down heavier than any argument. I reached for Zinnia's hand under the table. She squeezed back, her fingers small but steady. In that squeeze was all the clarity I needed. They could call her spoiled, they could call me soft, but I knew better. Protecting my child was not weakness, it was the only battle worth fighting. As dessert plates were cleared, laughter returned to the table, though it rang false, brittle at the edges. Conversations restarted, shallow and strained. I kept my eyes on Harlan across the table, watching his self-satisfied smirk as he leaned back in his chair, oblivious to the fracture showing through his mask. They thought I was overreacting. They thought I was the one making trouble. But deep down, I knew I had just witnessed the first crack in his carefully built facade. And it wouldn't be the last. The sound of forks clinking against plates filled the dining room. It should have been comforting, a familiar rhythm of family dinners, but the laughter that rose above it was too loud, stretched thin like fabric about to tear. I sat at the long wooden table, my mother's china glinting under the overhead light, watching the dynamics play out around me as though I were a spectator at a play, rather than part of the cast. Harlan, of course, held the stage. His voice carried easily, drowning out others, every opinion of his delivered with the weight of certainty. He leaned back in his chair as if he owned the house, telling story after story about how people had lost their sense of accountability. Each sentence landed like a gavel strike, silencing smaller conversations. Isolde hung on his every word, her face glowing with a mix of admiration and determination. She wanted everyone to see him the way she did, as a man who was shaping her future, a man who would lead their lives with confidence. My mother Valora nodded as though his every comment were a pearl of wisdom. Across the table, I saw Zinnia shifting lower in her chair. She traced the prongs of her fork against the edge of her plate, not eating, not speaking. My hand brushed hers, but she didn't look up. I thought to myself, sometimes families mistake volume for authority. The more he spoke, the more I could see everyone surrendering to his booming presence. It was as if the house itself had become a stage, and each of us had been given roles to play. Silent approval, feigned laughter, practiced deference. The harmony was false, but it kept the peace. The peace shattered a moment later. Zinnia's fork slipped from her hand, clattering to the floor. She bent down quickly, reaching for it under the table. I saw it, the sudden sharp movement of Harlan's foot. Not an accident, but a deliberate motion aimed squarely at her shin. His shoe struck her leg, and though the sound was muffled, I caught the tiny gasp she made, the way her shoulders stiffened. My chest tightened. She bit her lip hard enough to leave a mark, fighting back tears. I leaned close, my voice low. "Zinnia, are you okay?" She nodded quickly, her eyes wide, shimmering with moisture. She wanted to be brave, but bravery should never be demanded of a child. The others kept eating, passing dishes, pouring drinks. No one else seemed to notice, or maybe they had and chose not to. That was worse. Harlan sat back, unconcerned, not even glancing in my direction. His hand reached for his glass of wine with practiced ease, his smirk daring me to speak up. I swallowed hard. Discipline? No. This was cruelty dressed up as order. The silence between us stretched, heavy, until Zinnia pushed her chair back. She dragged it across the hardwood floor, the scrape loud in the hush that followed. Inch by inch, she pulled herself closer to me, away from him. The space she left beside him yawned empty, obvious, like a wound. Valora gave a quick, awkward laugh. She just wants to cling to her mother. You know how little girls are. But Isolde frowned, her tone sharp. This is what I've been saying. You're too lenient, Darren. That's why she acts spoiled. Harlan's right. Children need boundaries. The words stung, not because they were new, but because they were familiar. They had been thrown at me before, shaped as judgments about how I was failing my daughter. I looked at the chair left vacant beside Harlan. It wasn't just empty. It was a line drawn by my child, a silent refusal to be near him. To anyone who truly looked, it was louder than any protest. Inside, I thought, that silence between chairs said what no words dared to. The tension thickened. Harlan chuckled, leaning forward with that same easy arrogance. Kids these days think they can get away with anything. Too much freedom, not enough discipline. They grow up soft. I let his words hang for a beat before answering, calm and sharp. Or maybe they're just trying to survive the grown-ups around them. Fork stopped mid-air. The air shifted. Valora coughed suddenly, trying to divert the conversation back towards safer ground. Someone asked about wedding planning, their voice too bright, too eager to escape the discomfort, but the damage was already done. My words had sliced through the veil. I kept my expression even, my hands folded on the table, though I could feel Zinnia's small hand gripping my arm tightly, seeking comfort, pleading without words. Her touch anchored me in place, reminding me of what mattered. I didn't shout, I didn't accuse. I simply observed, each moment etching itself deeper in my mind. There is power in holding back when they expect you to scream. Dinner stretched on, each minute dragging. Conversations rose and fell, but none of them felt real. The laughter was hollow, like an echo in an empty room. I sat in that room, knowing the divide had been laid bare, Harlan's booming authority against my quiet resistance. And then there was Zinnia, shrinking smaller with each passing moment, retreating into herself. That image burned into me. This was not discipline. It was abuse wearing a mask, and they didn't see it. Or maybe they refused to. But I did, and I would never unsee it. The house was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional groan of old pipes settling in the walls. I had finally managed to fall asleep when the shrill buzz of my phone on the nightstand jolted me awake. The screen glowed in the darkness, and I fumbled for it with half-closed eyes. Seeing Zinnia's name made my heart pound before I even answered. "Mom?" Her voice was so small I had to strain to hear it. "Yes, baby, what is it? Are you all right?" Her whisper carried a tremor. He scared me again. He looked at me like I was bad. I didn't even do anything. I sat up straight, every nerve in my body alive. "Where are you right now?" "In Grandma's living room," she whispered, voice shaky. "They're all talking in the kitchen." I think he saw me spill my juice earlier. He didn't say anything, but his eyes... In the background, muffled voices bled through the call. Valora's familiar tone, Isolde laughing too loudly, Harlan's deep register cutting in. The contrast between their noise and Zinnia's trembling words hit me like ice water. "Listen to me, sweetheart," I said firmly, lowering my voice so she would feel steadied. "You did nothing wrong. You hear me? Nothing. You are good. Stay close to the phone until I tell you otherwise." She sniffled, and I heard the sound of her rabbit plush rubbing against the receiver as she clutched it. Fear never lies, I thought. Children don't invent the kind of fear that keeps them awake at night. When the call ended, I sat frozen in the dim light, my pulse racing. Memories I'd buried clawed their way back. I was 10 the first time I understood that punishment could be dressed up as love. My father had left long before that, and Valora believed that the harder she was on us, the stronger we'd be. I remembered standing with my palms red and stinging, told it was for my own good. Years later, she'd wave it off with that phrase, "We turned out fine." But fine was a mask. What she really meant was we learned to hide our bruises. Now here I was, listening to my daughter's whisper, knowing the cycle had rolled forward like an old wheel crushing another child beneath it. Did my mother see it? Did she recognize her tradition repeating through Harlan's so-called discipline? Or did she close her eyes the same way she once had with me? The thought twisted like a knife. Morning brought no relief. My phone rang again, Valora's name flashing. I considered ignoring it, but part of me knew I had to hear her out. "Darren," she said, her voice even, almost casual. "You need to calm down about last night." I drew a breath. "Mom, Zinnia called me terrified in the middle of the night. That's not nothing." "You're blowing things out of proportion. Families don't air their dirty laundry. You know how gossip spreads in this town." I closed my eyes, pinching the bridge of my nose. "This isn't laundry, Mom. This is my daughter's safety." Her tone sharpened. "Harlan is a good man. He loves your sister, and he's trying to help. You're too sensitive, just like you always were." There it was. That same accusation that had been hurled at me since I was a girl. Sensitive. As though being protective was weakness, as though noticing pain was a flaw. Inside, I thought, when the people meant to protect you deny your pain, it feels like being abandoned twice. "Mom," I said evenly, forcing steel into my voice, "do not confuse sensitivity with awareness. I saw him. I heard my daughter. I won't ignore it." She huffed, the kind of sigh that carried disappointment. "You're just looking for problems. We need peace in this family, not drama. Peace." The word rang hollow. It wasn't peace they wanted. It was silence. That evening, back in my apartment, I sat by Zinnia's bed. She was finally asleep, though her breathing hitched now and then, as if the fear followed her even into dreams. Her small hands clutched her stuffed rabbit so tightly it seemed like a lifeline. I brushed a strand of hair from her forehead and whispered, "You won't grow up thinking fear is normal, I promise you." She stirred slightly, but didn't wake. I sat there longer, listening to the rhythm of her breath, feeling the weight of every choice I had yet to make. In that quiet, I resolved something deep inside. Next time, I would not stay silent. The next confrontation would not end with me biting my tongue while my daughter shrank in her chair. Sometimes strength means breaking tradition, even if it breaks the family too. I leaned back, letting my eyes wander around the small room, her artwork taped to the walls, the glow of her nightlight casting soft shapes across the floor. The ordinary details of her world suddenly felt like sacred ground I was sworn to protect. I knew then that the conflict wasn't just looming, it was already here, waiting for its next eruption. Because the first bruise of childhood isn't always on the skin, it's in the silence of the adults who refuse to see. And my silence was over. Sunday afternoons had always carried a rhythm in my family. Church in the morning, lunch heavy with casseroles, and then, as if by script, everyone migrated to my mother's living room. The house smelled of lemon polish and coffee, sunlight slipping through lace curtains. It should have been calm, but beneath the polite chatter, I felt the familiar tension pressing in. Harlan settled himself close to Isolde on the sofa, his arm draped along the back like he owned not just the furniture, but the woman seated beside him. His voice dropped as he leaned toward her ear, but his eyes flicked toward me, sharp, assessing. Zinnia sat at my side, her little hand curling into the sleeve of my blouse, her body tense as if she could feel the undercurrent even without words. Around us, Valora laughed too loudly at something trivial, an attempt to maintain appearances. A cousin chimed in with stories from work, but no one was really listening. Everyone was playing their part. And as I sat there, I thought, sometimes families act like keeping quiet is love, but silence doesn't protect anyone. I caught the angle of Harlan's body, the way his lips brushed close to my sister's ear. His whisper wasn't entirely hidden. "Your sister is unstable," he said, his tone coated with disdain. "She's trying to ruin what we have." Isolde stiffened, a flicker of discomfort crossing her face. She didn't answer him, just smoothed the fabric of her skirt nervously. I heard enough. My stomach twisted, not from surprise, but from recognition. Abusers don't shout their lies. They plant them quietly, like seeds in fertile soil. Harlan leaned back again, smiling broadly at the room, as if he'd just complimented someone. His eyes slid past me like I wasn't there. I kept my composure, but my mind sharpened. He was pulling her deeper, strand by strand, into a web designed to isolate me. Minutes passed in stiff conversation until I broke the pattern. Zinnia is not safe around this kind of discipline, I said clearly, my voice steady though my chest tightened. The room went still. Isolde turned toward me, her eyes flashing. "You're just jealous," she snapped, her words cutting the air. "Jealous because I finally found someone who loves me." The silence that followed was heavier than shouting. My mother dropped her gaze to the carpet. Not one person spoke in my defense. Inside, I thought, jealousy, the oldest weapon used to silence women who speak out. I drew a breath. "Protecting my daughter isn't jealousy," I said, calm but unyielding. "It's my responsibility." But the sting of her words remained, carving deeper into the rift between us. My sister, once the closest ally I had, now stood across from me, defending the very man I feared most. Harlan chuckled low, as if amused by the exchange. "Kids these days need a firm hand. You're too soft, Darren." That was enough. I turned my gaze on him directly. "Stay away from my daughter," I said, each word measured like stone. The air in the room shifted, the weight of my statement echoing. Valora looked startled, a teacup frozen in her hand. Isolde gasped, covering her mouth with trembling fingers. Harlan, however, smirked. "You can't tell me how to act in this family," he said, mockery dripping from his tone. "The moment you call out a bully, he laughs first, because fear is his favorite mask." We sat in the heavy silence, everyone waiting for someone else to speak, but no one did. Valora adjusted her glasses, coughed, then changed the subject to weather, as though the storm hadn't already broken in her own living room. I stayed quiet, my hand resting on Zinnia's shoulder. She leaned against me, her small body pressing close. She didn't understand every word, but she knew enough, knew that lines had been drawn. The gathering stumbled on for another hour, conversations brittle, laughter forced. Eventually, people began to drift out, one by one, pretending the afternoon had been pleasant. I remained seated until the last goodbye was said, then rose, carrying Zinnia's coat in one hand. The weight of what had passed pressed heavy, but beneath it, a flame had taken root. Sometimes the first warning isn't for them. It's for yourself, a promise you won't back down. As I buckled Zinnia into the car seat, I felt her eyes on me. "Mom," she whispered, "are we going to be okay?" I kissed her forehead. "We will. Because I won't let anyone hurt you." Driving home, I knew my fight was only beginning. And from the look on Harlan's face when I spoke, I realized he had heard me loud and clear. But warnings are useless to a man who thrives on defiance. Dinner started with the sound of plates being set down, forks scratching lightly against porcelain, and an unease that had already filled the room before I even sat down. We had been through so many of these meals, but this one carried a heaviness that felt like we were all waiting for the inevitable spark. Harlan sat at the head of the table as if it had been reserved for him all his life, his posture commanding, his smirk steady. He poured himself wine without offering anyone else, then launched into trivial talk about local politics and the importance of strong leadership. Isolde kept glancing at me across the table, but forced a smile each time he turned toward her. It was the kind of smile that looked painted on, stiff and rehearsed. Valora tried to smooth things out, reaching for conversation that didn't threaten to split the room. "The pastor gave a good sermon today, didn't he?" she asked, her tone too bright. "Sure did," someone muttered, but no one expanded. I looked at Zinnia, who kept her eyes glued to her plate, pushing peas around rather than eating them. Every so often she'd glance at Harlan, then quickly drop her gaze again. She was tense, her back too straight for a child her age. Some silences weigh heavier than shouting, I thought. This was one of them. We were halfway through the meal when Harlan, clearly bored of politeness, leaned forward. His fork clinked against his plate as he spoke, his tone deliberate and cutting. "She needs a man to keep her in line." It hit like a stone tossed into still water, ripples spreading across every face at the table. Zinnia froze, her fork slipping from her fingers, clattering against her plate. She stared down, shoulders hunched. I felt the blood rush to my face, but I steadied my voice, letting each word cut through the silence like glass. No child needs a man to put her in line. She needs respect. For a moment, no one moved. The air was charged, thick with discomfort. Inside, I thought, that sentence wasn't just about her. It was about me, about every woman who'd ever been told she was less, who'd been told obedience was love. Valora broke the pause, her voice clipped. Men are supposed to guide families. That's their role. Harlan leaned back, satisfied at her support. Exactly, he said, his voice smug. I glanced around the table. Some of the older relatives nodded faintly, muttering agreement. That's how it used to be, one of them said. Old-fashioned values kept people in line. Isolde's voice rose, brittle and sharp. You're overreacting again, Darren, always making everything dramatic. He just means discipline. I felt the sharp divide then. Me on one side, almost everyone else aligned against me. The weight of their loyalty to him stung more than his words. When blood defends cruelty, you learn that not every family member is kin. I placed my hands on the table, leaned forward slightly, and raised my voice for the first time. This stops tonight. No one lays a hand or a word of violence on my daughter again. The words hung there, bold and immovable. Gasps spread around the table. Valora looked shocked, her eyes darting between me and Harlan. Isolde pressed her napkin to her lips, trembling. Harlan smirked, the corners of his mouth curling in mock amusement. You think your words carry weight here? He asked. I didn't flinch. I met his gaze, steady and unblinking. My calmness cut deeper than a scream ever could. Isolde slammed her fork down. You're trying to ruin everything for me. You've always been jealous, and now you can't stand that I'm happy. I shook my head slowly. The truth is, I'm not trying to ruin anything. I'm trying to save someone. That's the difference between us. The room erupted then, voices rising, overlapping, accusations flung like daggers. Valora pleaded for calm, insisting this is a family matter, but the sides had already formed, hard and unyielding. Half the table muttered that Harlan was right. The other half sat in uneasy silence, unwilling to cross the line. The chaos only deepened. Harlan raised his glass and sneered. Let her talk. It doesn't change anything. I rose from my chair, taking Zinnia's hand firmly in mine. My voice cut through the noise. Then hear this. I will protect her, with or without your approval. Zinnia's small fingers clung to mine as we turned away from the table. The din of arguments, shouts, and Valora's attempts to hush the room faded behind us. As I walked out, I felt a strange clarity settle over me. If they all wanted war, they had just declared it. Because when I stood my ground, Harlan decided to strike harder. We gathered again at my mother's house, though no one admitted the heaviness that clung to the air. The curtains were drawn against the late afternoon sun, casting the room in muted light. Coffee cups sat on coasters, but conversation was thin, every word strained. Isolde clung tightly to Harlan's arm, as if her grip could hold together the cracks spreading beneath us all. He looked perfectly at ease, smiling as though he were hosting, not visiting. His laughter was louder than the rest of ours combined, meant to fill the silence no one dared name. Valora moved from seat to seat, smoothing her dress and offering cookies, trying to stitch the illusion of harmony back together. But the silence between her words told the truth. Everyone was waiting for the storm. I sat with Zinnia pressed against my side, her head barely reaching my arm. She didn't say much, only tightened her hold on my blouse whenever Harlan's footsteps crossed the room. Sometimes the air in a room feels bruised before anyone lifts a hand. That's how it felt, sitting there, watching him move, knowing deep down something was about to break. I excused myself to fetch a glass of water for Zinnia. When I stepped back into the living room, the sight froze me mid-step. Harlan stood over my daughter, his face twisted with irritation. In one swift motion, his foot lashed out, striking her shin hard enough to knock her sideways against the sofa. The thud of her body against the cushions broke the room open. Kids need discipline, he snarled, his tone flat, unapologetic. Zinnia gasped, trying to catch herself. Her small hands trembled as she steadied on the sofa's edge. Stop, I shouted, rushing forward, pulling her against me. My body curved instinctively around hers, shielding her from him. Valora's teacup rattled on its saucer as she set it down, her eyes wide but her mouth silent. The rest of the family froze, eyes darting, but no one moving. Don't you dare touch my child again, I said, my voice firm, every syllable a wall between him and her. Harlan smirked. The silence pressed down on us all. For a moment, I thought he would sneer his way through, deny it. Instead, he shifted his stance, looked at the faces around him, and slowly dropped to his knees. The room gasped. "I'm sorry," he said, hands raised slightly. "I didn't mean it." His eyes, though, betrayed no regret. They gleamed with calculation, scanning the room to see who would side with him. Isolde leaned forward, her voice soft, desperate. "See? He's not a bad man. He just lost his temper." "No," I said, pulling Zinnia closer. "He wasn't kneeling for forgiveness. He was kneeling for control." His gaze flicked to mine, the smirk barely suppressed. Valora finally spoke, wringing her hands. "Let's not blow this out of proportion. Families argue, tempers flare. We can't let one moment undo us." "One moment?" My voice cracked but didn't rise. "That was no accident. That was deliberate." A cousin shifted uneasily. Maybe he didn't mean it the way it looked. The excuses spilled out, each one cutting deeper than the last. They wanted to minimize, to erase what we all had seen. I tightened my arms around Zinnia, who clung to me with trembling fingers. My voice steadied, low but resolute. "My daughter is not your test of manhood." Silence again. Some avoided my gaze, others stared at the floor. Harlan's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing as if to remind me he wasn't finished. He said nothing, but the weight of his glare promised this wasn't over. I realized then his kneeling was not the end. It was the opening act. I stood, pulling Zinnia up with me. "We're leaving," I said flatly. No one stopped me. As I stepped out into the fading light, my heart pounded so hard it ached, but beneath the fear, my resolve sharpened. Sometimes the greatest danger isn't in the strike. It's in the calm after, when you know the storm isn't over. And the storm was coming. The evening settled around us like a heavy blanket, everyone tucked into Valora's parlor after dinner. Coffee cups balanced on saucers, the air filled with the faint scent of cinnamon rolls that had long gone cold. Small talk carried across the room, but beneath it, there was a performance in progress. Isolde lifted her hand yet again, tilting it deliberately under the lamplight so her diamonds sparkled for all to see. "Harlan chose it himself," she said with pride, her voice soft but laced with a need for admiration. Harlan leaned back in the armchair, smug, his eyes flicking from me to the ring as though he was the one wearing it. Valora smiled, sighing like a schoolgirl. "That ring is a promise, a man's word made real. It means stability, commitment." I watched my sister spin the jewel, twisting her hand so the light bounced against the walls. To me, it didn't look like a promise. It looked like a leash. Sometimes jewelry isn't a bond, it's a chain dressed up as love. Zinnia sat beside me on the edge of the sofa, her rabbit plush tucked under her chin. She didn't speak, but I saw her eyes dart toward Harlan, then down again, as if even the sparkle of that diamond reminded her of what wasn't being said. The conversation shifted, but Harlan's voice always carried. He leaned toward Isolde, his lips brushing just enough to keep the words for her. "Your sister," he murmured. "She wants to ruin your happiness. Can't stand to see you cared for." I caught fragments, enough to see the shape of the poison. Isolde's smile wavered, her shoulders tense, but her thumb rubbed against that ring, again and again, like it anchored her to him. I studied the exchange, every detail, the way his hand rested lightly on her knee, the way he timed his smiles for the room while planting seeds in her ear. It was the same pattern I'd seen before, lavish praise mixed with control, promises wrapped around restrictions. "A man who needs you chained by gold fears the day you take it off." Isolde turned suddenly toward me, parroting his line with sharpness in her tone. "You always want to bring drama, Darren. Can't you just let us be happy?" Valora nodded from her chair. "Your sister is right. Peace doesn't survive constant criticism." I didn't answer immediately. My jaw tightened, but my silence wasn't surrender. It was recognition. His plan was working. Across the room, Astria, my aunt, sat in her usual spot, sipping her coffee. She hadn't spoken much all evening. But when I caught her eyes, there was something there. Hesitation, guilt. I knew why. Earlier, when I had turned briefly to adjust Zinnia's sweater, Harlan had gripped her arm too tightly, dragging her closer when she tried to step away. A red mark lingered against her pale skin. Astria had seen it. I had seen her see it. And yet she sat now, eyes down, coffee cup trembling slightly, saying nothing. Silence can wound deeper than words. It tells the victim they are alone. Zinnia rubbed her arm gently, unconsciously, and the sight made my chest ache. No one acknowledged it but me. The laughter in the room grew brittle. The conversation sounded rehearsed, each word lighter than air. Harlan grew bolder, leaning back as if the house belonged to him. His gaze drifted, testing each person, searching for weakness. I decided to press. "Aunt Astria," I said, my voice steady. "Did you see what just happened?" Her eyes flicked to me, then down to the dark surface of her coffee. "I think you're misinterpreting," she whispered. Valora cut in quickly, her voice sharp. "Stop looking for problems, Darren. We all need to move on." The walls of the room felt closer. I looked around, my own mother brushing me off, my sister clinging to the ring like a lifeline, my aunt lowering her gaze into silence. When family chooses silence, you learn the cost of speaking the truth. I rose, taking Zinnia's hand. She clutched her rabbit tighter, eyes wide. My heart pounded, but I knew staying in that room any longer would only bury us deeper under their denial. As I walked toward the door, I glanced back one last time. The diamond ring caught the light, shining fiercely against Isolde's hand. Beside it, Astria's eyes stayed down, avoiding mine. Jewelry and silence, two chains to bind us all. The chandeliers in the country club glimmered above us, their golden light spilling across polished wood floors, and tables draped in white linen. Laughter rippled through the hall, glasses clinked, and waiters moved gracefully between clusters of guests. To anyone looking from the outside, it was a flawless engagement celebration. Harlan thrived at the center of it all. He shook hands, slapped shoulders, spoke loudly enough to command attention without needing to raise his voice. His grin was wide, his suit immaculate, his image polished to perfection. Guests nodded approvingly, as if his confidence were something admirable. Isolde beamed beside him, her ring sparkling under the chandelier light. She turned her hand this way and that, making sure everyone saw. Valora circulated proudly among relatives and church friends, whispering about family honor and how this engagement proved the strength of her household. I stood off to the side, watching carefully. I felt the energy in the room pressing against me like a tide, trying to drown my unease. Zinnia clung to my hand, quiet in her simple dress, her rabbit toy peeking from her purse. She didn't laugh or run about like the other children. She stayed close, shrinking against the noise. "Smile, sweetheart," I whispered, brushing her hair back, but her wide eyes told me she couldn't, and neither could I. As applause rose for another toast, Zinnia tugged gently at my sleeve. "Mom," she murmured, pressing a folded piece of paper into my hand. I opened it discreetly. The crayon lines leapt out in their simplicity, a large figure towering over a small child, foot raised in the air as if to strike. The child's face was small, mouth open in a silent cry. The air caught in my throat. It wasn't just a child's drawing, it was a testimony. Children tell stories adults refuse to see. My daughter had put her truth in color because she knew no one was listening to her words. I tucked the paper safely into my bag, the edges trembling in my fingers. Not yet, I thought, but soon. Dinner was cleared, and the speeches began. Harlan stood tall with his glass in hand, voice booming across the hall. "Discipline and respect, those are the pillars of a strong family. Without them, children grow weak, selfish, ungrateful. I intend to bring those values back." The room applauded. My heart pounded. I stepped forward, pulling the iPad from my bag. My voice cut through the chatter. "Then let's talk about what discipline sounds like." The guest turned toward me, confusion flickering. I pressed play. Harlan's voice filled the hall, distorted only slightly by the speaker. "You need to learn respect." Then the sickening thud of a shoe against small legs, followed by Zinnia's cry, raw and unguarded. Silence dropped like a weight. Forks stilled, Glasses froze in midair. Faces shifted from admiration to disbelief, then horror. Isolde's smile faltered, her lips parting but no words escaping. Valora gasped, clutching her chest with one hand. The truth doesn't whisper. It roars when you finally let it out. Harlan let out a forced laugh, breaking the silence. That's out of context. Children cry all the time. This is being twisted. Murmurs rippled through the hall. Guests exchanged uneasy looks. He just lost his temper, Isolde said weakly, her voice trembling. He didn't mean it. I shook my head and pulled Zinnia's drawing from my bag. I held it high, my voice firm. This is what discipline looks like through a child's eyes. Gasps echoed, louder this time. The crude figure with its looming foot said what no speech could. The image was undeniable. Harlan's face flushed, the mask slipping at the edges. His voice cracked with strain as he said, "This is ridiculous. You're humiliating us all." "No," I replied. "You humiliated yourself the moment you raised your foot against a child." The room erupted, some voices condemning, others whispering disbelief. The applause of earlier had turned into judgment. The man who had strutted across the floor now stood stripped bare by the sound of his own cruelty and the drawing of a 7-year-old. Isolde trembled beside him, her hand clutching her ring as if it might hold her together. Valora looked torn between denial and realization, her lips moving soundlessly. I stood steady, Zinnia's hand clasped in mine. My daughter's wide eyes lifted toward me, uncertain but hopeful. The lie had finally split open, and there was no sealing it shut again. Harlan's mask cracked, his voice shaking as whispers spread like wildfire. Isolde's fingers quivered against the ring. Valora looked away, unable to meet my gaze, and I knew the night wasn't over. Justice was about to walk through the door. The room was frozen in the echo of Zinnia's cry from the recording. The iPad screen dimmed in my hand, but its sound still lingered inside everyone's ears like a ghost that couldn't be chased away. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Guests shifted in their seats, eyes darting between me and Harlan, some shaking their heads as though denying what they had just heard might make it vanish. Harlan adjusted his tie, forcing a smile that faltered at the edges. "That was misinterpreted," he said, his voice pitched louder than necessary. "Kids cry. That doesn't mean abuse. Let's not jump to conclusions." Isolde clutched her ring so tightly her knuckles paled. Her face was drained of color, her lips parted, but no words came out. Valora, ever the keeper of appearances, cleared her throat. "We are family," she said weakly. "Unity is more important than misunderstandings. We can't let outsiders think we're divided." Unity without truth is just another word for silence, I thought, scanning the hall of familiar faces. Their silence was louder than the chandelier's hum. Harlan rose, his voice sharp, riding on false confidence. "This is an ambush. She staged this. She's been jealous from the start, desperate to tear me down." A few guests frowned, their uncertainty hanging in the air. Some looked back at me as if weighing which version of reality they would choose. Isolde's tears finally broke free. "He just gets strict sometimes," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "He doesn't mean harm." I straightened, keeping my voice calm but unyielding. The bruise on my daughter's arm wasn't staged. Neither was her fear. You heard it yourself. Murmurs stirred, a shift in the tide. People leaned closer to one another, whispering, weighing. Some began to doubt him. Others glanced at Zinnia, who clung to me silently, her small eyes a mirror of everything they didn't want to see. When truth and lies wrestle in the open, it's the silence of bystanders that decides the outcome. I reached into my bag again and pulled out my second piece of evidence. If the recording wasn't enough, maybe this will be. I tapped the screen, and the hall filled with the muted sound of the doorbell camera. The footage flickered to life, Harlan shoving Zinnia roughly by the arm as they entered Valora's house days earlier. Her small body lurched forward, stumbling against the threshold. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Several women pressed their hands to their mouths. One man muttered, "My God," shaking his head. Harlan's composure cracked. His voice wavered. That was me guiding her inside. She tripped. "Guidance doesn't leave bruises," I said firmly. "Protection doesn't make children cry." the whispers rose to a roar. Faces turned cold, shoulders shifted away from him. The man who had filled the room with his charm hours ago now stood shrinking under its weight. Lies collapse under their own weight when the truth is undeniable. The crowd turned against him quickly. Whispers sharpened into condemnation. Someone spoke openly, their voice carrying over the noise. That's abuse, not discipline. Others nodded, their agreement ringing in the hall. Isolde buried her face in her hands, her ring trembling as if even the diamond couldn't hold together her illusion. Valora avoided my gaze, staring down at her clasped fingers. Harlan lashed out, his voice rising in desperation. "You're all blind, ungrateful. I've done nothing but show strength, and this is how you repay me?" But his words fell flat. The crowd no longer belonged to him. His mask had cracked, his performance stripped bare under the harsh light of truth. Abusers fear nothing more than being seen for who they are. Two security staff from the country club stepped closer, their presence quiet but firm. The guests pulled back slightly, the hum of whispers giving way to a heavy silence. Harlan's voice faltered, his eyes darting, searching for an ally, but there were none left. I stood firm, Zinnia's hand clasped in mine. She pressed closer, and I leaned down enough to whisper, "It's over, baby. They see it now." The judgment in the room weighed heavier than any gavel. He had been tried not in court, but in the eyes of those he had fooled. The mask had fallen, and he was left kneeling in his own lies. The hall was still humming with the aftershock of what had just unfolded. Guests clustered in tight circles, their whispers filling the room like restless bees. The iPad lay on the table beside me, its screen gone dark, but its evidence was alive in every stunned face that turned away from Harlan now. Then the doors opened, and the sound of heavy boots crossed the polished floor. Police officers in dark uniforms entered with measured steps, their presence immediately shifting the atmosphere from chaos to something heavier, more official. A hush fell over the crowd. Harlan straightened his suit jacket, lifting his chin as if appearances could still save him. His hands smoothed the front of his blazer, but I saw the twitch at the corner of his mouth, the way his eyes darted toward the exits. One officer stepped forward. "We've received a report and supporting evidence. We'll need to review with the parties involved." The crowd murmured, voices breaking the silence. "Police? Here?" "Oh, Lord." The officer looked at me. "Ma'am, are you the one who submitted the recordings?" I nodded, holding Zinnia's hand tightly. "Yes, both the iPad recording and the doorbell footage are mine. They are real, and they are her truth." The officer gestured for the devices. "We'll need to verify." I handed them over, my voice steady. "Do what you need. I've nothing to hide." Inside, I thought, the law had stepped into the room, and for once, silence worked in my favor. Isolde clutched Harlan's arm like a drowning woman, her eyes wide, her lips whispering his name over and over. He patted her hand with mock reassurance, but his knuckles were pale. Harlan's phone buzzed, and within minutes a man in a sharp suit pushed his way through the crowd. His lawyer. "This is outrageous," the man barked, his voice meant to command. "My client is being humiliated in front of friends and family." "Discipline in the home is not abuse. It is the right of a man to set order." Gasps broke out. Someone muttered, "Did he just say that?" The lawyer pointed toward me. "This woman has a personal grudge. She's manipulated evidence, twisted moments, all to destroy his reputation. Nothing more than family jealousy turned into spectacle." I stood taller, my voice cutting through his words. "A grudge doesn't leave bruises on a child's arm. A grudge doesn't make a little girl cry out in the night because she's terrified of the man her aunt is marrying." The officers exchanged looks, their pens moving across notepads. One nodded gravely, eyes fixed on the iPad replaying the clip. Whispers surged louder. Guests who had once praised Harlan now shook their heads, voices carrying, "That's no discipline." He crossed a line. When lies echo in a room full of truth, they crumble like dust. In the middle of the chaos, Isolde stared at her hand. The diamond ring glittered, but its weight looked unbearable. My words from weeks ago, my warning, must have echoed in her mind. Her breath quickened, her hand trembling. With deliberate slowness, she pulled the ring from her finger. The silence in the hall deepened as she held it, staring at it as though she barely recognized what it symbolized anymore. "I can't," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I can't marry a man who hurts children." And with a trembling cry, she flung the ring onto the floor. It landed with a sharp metallic clatter that echoed louder than any toast ever had. Gasps erupted across the hall. Valora's hand flew to her chest, her face stunned into silence. Sometimes freedom doesn't sound like a speech. It sounds like a ring hitting the floor. Harlan's face contorted. "You ungrateful," he began, but the officers stepped forward, cutting his words off. "Sir, you're under arrest for child endangerment and abuse," one officer said firmly, pulling out handcuffs. Harlan jerked back, his voice breaking. "This family is betraying me. She's ruining everything. You'll regret this." His finger jabbed toward me, trembling with rage. I met his eyes, calm and unflinching. "No, I'll never regret protecting my child." The metallic snap of the cuffs filled the hall. The officers read him his rights, their voices clear, steady, final. Isolde sobbed quietly, her body trembling, but her hands staying folded in her lap. She didn't move to stop them. Valora sat rigid, her eyes downcast, caught between her beliefs and the evidence laid bare before her. Justice doesn't always arrive with a gavel. Sometimes it arrives with handcuffs. One by one, the guests began to disperse, their whispers trailing after them like smoke. The celebration was gone, replaced by echoes of shock and fragments of judgment. I stood with Zinnia pressed against me, her face hidden in my side. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of relief, though my body still shook from the storm. A few guests approached quietly. One woman touched my arm gently. "I'm sorry. We should have believed you sooner." Another whispered, "You did the right thing." Their apologies didn't erase the damage, but they steadied me. He had mocked me for speaking up, but tonight, truth mocked him louder. The week after Harlan's arrest passed with an odd quiet. Yet when I walked into my mother's house for the first family gathering since that night, I realized silence could feel as heavy as thunder. The living room smelled faintly of brewed coffee and the pot roast Valora had prepared, but there was no warmth in it. It was the hush of people bracing themselves. Valora sat stiffly in her chair, her hands folded on her lap, her eyes darting everywhere but toward me. She spoke to cousins about church events, to an uncle about the weather, but when her gaze almost met mine, it veered away sharply. She was unsettled, but pride kept her lips sealed. Isolde looked pale, a shadow of herself, her eyes ringed with exhaustion. Her hands trembled when she poured cream into her cup. The ring was gone, her finger bare, the skin indented where the diamond once sat. She didn't look at me either. I sat on the edge of the sofa with Zinnia nestled against my side, her small hand curling into my sleeve. I felt weary, worn down from weeks of holding my ground, but more determined than ever. Justice had spoken in the hall, but home remained a courtroom without a judge. It didn't take long for the old wounds to reopen. Valora finally broke the silence, her voice sharp enough to cut. "You should not have dragged this family through the mud. Going public the way you did, it's shameful. Our name has always meant something here." I kept my voice even, though my chest burned. Protecting my daughter was never betrayal. It was survival. The words landed, but Valora shook her head, lips pressed thin. Isolde set her cup down hard, her eyes brimming. "I loved him," she said, her voice breaking. "I thought he loved me. I gave him everything. And you destroyed it." The room tensed. Some relatives nodded subtly, others stared down at their plates, unwilling to enter the fire. I leaned forward. "Isolde, I didn't destroy anything. He did, and the signs were there. You just chose not to see them." Her tears spilled. "Stop! You don't understand. I wanted to believe." People turned toward me, muttering. One relative said under his breath, "If you had handled this privately." Another whispered, "She broke the engagement with her drama." Zinnia tugged at my sleeve, her voice small but piercing. "Mom, why are they mad at you?" Her words cut through the air sharper than mine ever could. Everyone froze, confronted by innocence they couldn't brush aside. For a moment, no one knew what to say. It was Astria, quiet Astria in the corner, who finally spoke. She set down her coffee cup, her hands trembling slightly. I can't stay silent anymore. All eyes swung to her. She looked at Valora, then at me. I saw him. I saw Harlan grab Zinnia's arm hard enough to leave a mark. I should have said something. I didn't, because I didn't want this family divided. But she was right all along. Gasps spread around the room. Valora's hand flew to her mouth. Isolde covered her face, shaking her head. I closed my eyes briefly, the relief washing over me tangled with sorrow. It took too long, I whispered. But thank you. Sometimes truth comes late, but even late truth carries weight. Valora found her voice again, defensive. You still shouldn't have brought it all out in public. A family's reputation. Public, I interrupted, steady, is where abusers lose their power. Silence in these walls is what gave him strength. Isolde finally lifted her face, streaked with tears. I feel betrayed. Not by you, Darren, but by myself. I saw things I didn't want to see. And now I can't take it back. The room fell quiet again. Some relatives looked away, refusing to take sides. Others shifted uncomfortably, the fractures in our bloodline visible, unrepairable. I looked at Zinnia, who had pulled paper and crayons from her small bag. She bent over quietly, drawing as the adults quarreled. When she handed me the paper, my throat tightened. It was a simple picture, just the two of us, hand in hand, smiling under a sun, no one else around. Symbol and truth, drawn in bright colors. I folded it gently, tucking it into my purse. When we finally left Valora's house, the air outside felt sharp against my skin, colder than I expected. Zinnia walked beside me, her hand snug in mine. Justice can put a man in handcuffs, but it can't heal the fractures in a family that chose silence. At the door, Astria touched my arm. I should have spoken sooner, she said softly. Her eyes held regret, heavy and honest. I nodded once. Better late than never, but some wounds won't close. As I led Zinnia down the walkway, my chest ached with both relief and heartbreak. Even forgiveness has its limits, and I had reached mine. The morning light spilled through my apartment blinds, soft and golden, landing on the small pile of crayons Zinnia had left scattered on the coffee table. The apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes after weeks of chaos, where every breath feels like a reprieve. I listened for her breathing from the bedroom, steady, rhythmic, and let myself lean back in the chair for a moment. The hardest battles don't end with applause. They end in the quiet rooms you return to. My chest still ached with the weight of words spoken and unspoken. Harlan was in custody, his mask torn away in front of everyone who once praised him. Yet my family, the ones who should have stood with me, remained divided, fractured in ways no verdict could repair. I walked into Zinnia's room and saw her still curled beneath her blanket, her stuffed rabbit tucked under her chin. The faint bruise on her arm was fading now, a reminder not of weakness but of survival. Mom? Her voice broke the silence, soft and uncertain. Yes, baby. Are we safe now? I knelt by her bed and brushed a strand of hair from her face. Yes, I said firmly. We're safe now. And I won't let anyone hurt you again. Her eyes closed, and for the first time in weeks, I saw her body relax. Family may fracture, but the bond with my child was unbreakable. Later that morning, she tugged at my sleeve, handing me a folded paper. I made something, she whispered. I unfolded it carefully. Crayon strokes in bright colors filled the page, 2 figures, just her and me, holding hands under a wide yellow sun. The words scrawled across the top in uneven letters. Just you and me. My throat tightened. Children speak the language of truth through crayons and paper. She had never doubted me, not once. I pinned the drawing to the wall above the kitchen table. It wasn't just paper. It was a declaration, a new beginning written in a child's hand. Sometimes a child's art carries more weight than any courtroom ruling. The next day, I sat at my desk and wrote. Not a diary entry, not a letter to family. This was a statement to the community. I sent it to the local paper under my own name, a piece about the difference between discipline and abuse. As Maya Angelou said, I wrote, When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. We must believe our children when they tell us they are afraid. Protecting them is not weakness. It is the truest form of strength. The article was published, and people talked. At the grocery store, a woman stopped me. "I read your words," she said, tears in her eyes. "It reminded me of my childhood. Thank you." I nodded, humbled, knowing that my voice had become more than just mine. It was a shield for Zinnia and a call for others. I refused to let silence return. Valora read it too, though she never spoke of it. She clipped the article and tucked it into her Bible, a quiet gesture of acknowledgement without apology. Isolde, weeks later, sent me a short note. "I was blind. I see now. I'm sorry. It wasn't enough to heal us, but it was something." One Saturday, I took Zinnia to the park. The morning was bright, the air crisp. She ran across the grass, her laughter carrying through the open space, free in a way she hadn't been in months. I watched her arms spread wide as she spun in circles, unafraid, sunlight warming her face. Every step she took without fear was a step I had won back for her. I sat on the bench, watching her, feeling a strange mixture of exhaustion and hope. Astria appeared quietly, sitting beside me without words. Her presence was enough, silent support, steady and real. Zinnia came running back, breathless, cheeks flushed. She climbed into my lap, pressing her head against my shoulder. "Mom," she whispered, "we're happy now, right?" I kissed the top of her head. "Yes, sweetheart, we are finally walking into the light." That afternoon, as the sun dipped low, I looked at the world ahead. Not perfect, not free of pain, but mine to build anew with her. Harlan was gone, the family was cracked, but we were standing. And stronger than before. I didn't just protect my daughter. I rewrote what family meant.